Okay, so anyway, here we are. We're going to talk about the aggregate demand curve, which illustrates the relationship between the aggregate price level and quantity of aggregate output demanded. Okay, look at how the aggregate supply curve illustrates the relationship between the aggregate price level and the quantity of aggregate output supplied. Why is the aggregate supply curve different in the short run than in the long run? Okay, so right now, I'm just going to kind of throw this out there. Our short run aggregate supply curve is going to be way short now. There's going to be a big gap that we're going to talk about in our short-term aggregate supply curve and our long-term right now in this very economy as we speak. That gap is being widened. All right, so we're going to talk about how those fluctuations happen and go from there. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all 60 slides or whatever they have here, but I want to give you enough that you can be able to take a test. And by the way, I have the test ready. I just have to open it up and give some instruction on how to do that. So here we are. Shocks to the system. Again, you'd think I just wrote these slides right now in this past week. What causes recessions? Okay, why is inflation high in some recessions and not in others? The economy's behavior can be explained, predicted, and potentially manipulated by looking at total aggregate demand and total aggregate supply. So right now in this economy, what is causing this recession right now is on the supply side. You have suppliers having to shut down by order of the government. So you're sending people home. Your businesses are going out of business. Some businesses will never open again. Okay, so it's right there on the supply side. I mean, that is sucking money right out of the GDP every time someone doesn't use gasoline to go to a sporting event. I mean, you think of all the jerseys that aren't being made, all of the food that's not being sold at concessions, all of that is sucking right out of that supply side of the economy. So keep that in mind as we take a look at this here. Hold on here. Next, okay, here we go. And this one. Let's go back. Okay, so right here, here's the demand curve. Aggregate demand curve, again, the relationship between the aggregate price level and the quantity of aggregate output demanded by households, businesses, government, and the rest of the world. So, and this here's, we've already talked about this one in class. Again, it's downward sloping. The lower the price, more goods are going to be purchased. And you can follow that arrow down. And then the higher the price, the fewer the goods that are going to be purchased. So if you look at the left you're going to have on the left axis there, you have the price level. On the right, down here at the bottom, this is real GDP. Okay, this is real GDP that we're talking about. So remember that. So you're moving along here. This is your aggregate demand curve, and that's how that moves there as far as the price level goes. Now remember our important formula up here: GDP equals C plus I plus G plus X minus IM. And normally I would have a back and forth discussion. And please, if anybody has a question, do speak up. And, I'm not just trying to preach to you here tonight. If we were face to face, it would be very discussion oriented. You know that. I welcome questions and comments. It's just, it's a little different here. We're learning a little bit differently. But what has to happen here is this GDP. Now, again, you're seeing right before your very eyes in the economy, C is shrinking. All right. So anytime one of these components on the right side of GDP is shrinking, that GDP is shrinking, and that's what causes recessions. So now you have the government talking about, hey, how are they going to get spending back up in order to rescue GDP? If you want to look at it that way. So that, again, You're seeing this on the news with all the closures, with all the schools. There's no traveling much. Airlines especially are being hit, any kind of hotels. I just heard where they're laying off tens of thousands of people. So this here, like I said, the sea is shrinking. And then not only that, so we kind of have a perfect storm. You either have a recession that is based on the supply side, like we're talking here tonight. All right. Where businesses are shutting down, laying people off. And then you either have that or you have, a demand shock where, there's just too much money going after too few of goods. All right. And there's also a third way in which we experienced that kind of shock in 2008, where the financial system collapsed. All right. So we're in the middle of, get this, all three of these happening at once. All right. So anybody thinks they know anything about anything, they have to recognize that all three of these are happening at once. We have a supply side issue, recessionary. Think of some of the items. Some of you went to the store and prices have already been raised on certain items. So you're starting to see a demand side shock as well. And then the stock market, falling, 2,000 and 3,000 points in one day. You have the financial side of things going on. So you have the wealth effect, which is a higher aggregate price level reduces the purchasing power of households' wealth and reduces consumer spending. But the other thing the wealth effect does is when people have, stocks are going up, their house value is going up, even though they don't sell those things to buy, they feel richer and they're going to buy more items. They're going to buy that new car because they feel wealthier. But when the stock market goes down, that goes away. So you have that third prong of this recession that is happening right before our eyes. Okay. The supply side of things, businesses shutting down, sending workers home, because a lot of them aren't getting checks, and they won't get checks until the government steps in and gives checks there. And I know early in the class, I made the comment that, we always tend to, a natural rate of unemployment. We tend toward equilibrium. Well, we're not in equilibrium right now. Okay. And, you don't want to wait 10 years for this thing to, return to equilibrium during your, career building years. Okay. So, then the interest rate, higher the interest rate, the more money people are going to have to borrow, or they're going to save more money because they can invest that as the interest rate goes up. And we're not experiencing that right now. We have low interest rates and people are, buying houses and so forth. Up until now, I'm not sure exactly what the housing market's doing right now, but right now the aggregate demand curve and the income expenditures model, we now drop the assumption that the overall price level is fixed. When the aggregate price level changes, aggregate expenditures curve shifts. So again, the aggregate demand curve is the application of the income and expenditure model at different prices. So this here, let me point out this 45-degree line. Once you take a look at the video on chapter 11 and and do the problem, which I posted the solution to it, and then I also explained it on the video. But this 45-degree line on this slide 6 shows all the expenditures in the economy if nothing was saved. If there was no savings going on, that is what that 45-degree line are. If all three are going on, what do we do to stop? Okay, so the question is, if all three of these that I just explained are going on, what do we do to stop, or what will happen if it doesn't stop? Okay, well, it will stop. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take. So, the government, like I said, they are one of the prongs to the GDP. They're one of the components. And they're talking about spending a lot of money right now. Okay. And when you see the multiplier effect in chapter 11, you'll know what I'm talking about. So again, I'm leaving some holes here because again, chapter 11's on the video, but the government is trying to enact, what's that? Okay. The government is trying to enact a spending plan to compensate for that. Okay. Which is going to be huge. All right. I mean, they're talking about sending checks to people. And if you look at the, again, once you look at 11, you'll be, I think you'll be fascinated at how money, quadruples in the economy once it goes through the spending multiplier. Just as fast as it's shrinking right now. It should grow the other way as well. It should be able to be turned around. Now, how long that takes, that just depends. It depends on the economy. I think one thing for certain is, we are going to make leaps and bounds in technology and in scientific research. I think that's going to happen. The medical field is just going to explode, coming up with all kinds of, new, cures, maybe possibly cures, more treatments. I think that end of things is really going to happen because, I mean, this virus has thrown us into that kind of environment where something has to be done. So as far as the time goes, it could take some time. I hope it's not like it was in the Great Depression where it took like 10 years. I mean, you're talking about, like I said, people's careers and people's incomes that are being affected right now in this situation. So I don't know how much that answers you. I'm showing you the tools and how it does happen. And then let's see right here, the expenditure. Again, we're dealing with expenditures here because that's what it's going to take in order to get the economy back. So if the price level drops, planned spending rises at all output levels from the wealth and interest effect. So if prices drops of things, there's more spending. All right. This leads to a multiplier process, which again, we go into a great detail in chapter 11. So if you're a little lost on the multiplier process, once you look at the video in chapter 11, go through the first 25 slides is all that has to do with. And I lay it out with notes and everything. So that will explain that multiplier process. But anyway, so here, planned aggregate expending. Again, sometimes that changes, and there's shifts that happen in the aggregate expenditures. And if you look at the slide on the right, the panel on the right there, again, it's just showing once again how prices lower, and how they, the lower the price, the more is the higher GDP is going to go up. So if you look down at the bottom, don't forget in looking at these curves that there's a label down at the bottom, and that's real GDP. And so we want to pay attention to that as we move forward, because this grows and shrinks as we move along the supply and demand. All right, let's see what else I have here before we bring it all together, because this all comes together here in a minute. So what happens when some factor changes spending patterns in every price level? Okay, well, here we go. And again, you'd think I just wrote this based on this week's economy, but the aggregate demand curve is shifting because of changes in expectations. All right. People expect us to run out of food or run out of toilet paper. Okay. So these expectations are causing a shift in the demand curve. Okay. Which is raising prices of those things. So you have that demand shock where prices are going up because people are creating this hysterical demand. All right. Wealth. All right. Here's the other side of it. Again, once again, when people feel like they've lost their wealth, they're not going to spend as much, and that's going to cause a shift in the demand as well. It could shift downward in that case on certain items. And then size of the existing stock of physical capital that depends on how much, right now we're going to have excess capital. I mean, Ford is shutting down certain plants. So that is physical capital that is shrinking. Okay. I mean, or I should say we have excess capacity, but it may be running at 50%. All right. Now we get down to where we are. So the first three kind of described our economy right now, what's happening in this downward shift in demand, as well as supply. Okay, supply is shifting leftward as well. So now you have government policies, and that's the one. All of us want to think we're independent of the government, and we want the government out of our lives. All right, I'm sure all of you've heard these arguments before, but now all of a sudden we're kind of in in a situation where we need a government to help us get out of this. And you're going to hear about fiscal policy, all of this spending, where businesses are going to get $300 billion. Consumers are going to get checks to the tune of $500 billion. You're going to be a couple of separate checks go out to people who, based on their income. If you make $1 million or something like that, you're not getting any. It's below, people making less than $1 million a year. So fiscal policy, that's what we're talking about in this economy right now. Okay. So that's what you're going to be hearing a lot about. So pay attention to that. This class will come alive as far as the principles that you're learning in here. So now we're graphing the shifts of the aggregate demand curve. So here, in the left panel, we're showing an increase in aggregate demand. All right. This here's where, and don't forget, real GDP's down at the bottom axis there, and aggregate price levels on the left. But a shift in the aggregate demand curve, again, it happens when the nation's wealthier. It was happening up until the stock market crash, until this virus came in. We were having some degree of rightward shift in the aggregate demand. Okay. But where we're at now is on the right panel. Okay. Where you have an aggregate demand shift leftward. You have a decrease in aggregate demand. I mean, people aren't, again, the sports teams aren't playing. Restaurants are closed. Barbershops are closed. I hope nobody needed a haircut for a little while. Those things, not only did supply get affected, which we're going to go into here in a minute, but demand is definitely shift to the right. So, and I try to keep these videos under a half hour just simply because they record better and they transfer better under that. So I'm going to be mindful of that. So again, here's factors. This here is a table. I won't read all of these, but we've talked about them. Again, this is our economy right now. Mainly the shifts that are happening on the right side of this chart here. You can look at those on your own. They're in the book. They're in the PowerPoints. So I won't spend the video time doing that. I'd rather you look those up yourself. So let me move along here and get to a couple more meatier things, then go over the problem that we had. Okay, let's see. Housing market crashes. Rapid inflation shrinks our wealth. Housing market crashes. We've already experienced those, so I'm going to move through that. If the economy is in equilibrium and the real estate market collapses, what is likely to happen? Okay. And, again, this one wasn't a real estate driven economy here, but at the same time, the aggregate demand curve shifts leftward. So just like in 2008, when we had a leftward shift in demand, we're having that same situation right now. Again, housing was, I told you in class, housing is the economy is housing. Because, like I said, with the next generation, the millennials coming in, we're at a shortage of about 20 million houses. So that's going to turn around here at some point. Building's going to go on again. People are going to buy houses again. So But how to distinguish between shifts of the AD curve and the movement along it? It's not always easy to. I know like I said, we have three things going on in this economy, but it's not always hard. It's not always easy to determine what's causing what. But in this one here, we can kind of see exactly what's going on. There's little question in this economy as it relates to the textbook on this issue here. So in 79, it was hard to predict. We had the oil price, that was a supply side shock. Prices rose 14.8% while consumer and investment spending dropped because interest rates were too high. It was a leftward shift in the short run aggregate supply curve. All right, and hopefully we'll get to those here real soon. Right here. Go back here. Okay, the aggregate supply curve shows the relationship between the aggregate price level and the quantity of aggregate output in the economy supplied in the economy. So once again, here's the supply side. As prices go down, okay, so look at this again. I have to keep pointing you down at the bottom axis there where real GDP is. It's nice when prices go down, but at the same time, if we're at equilibrium and prices are going down, we're losing GDP value. So in 1929, believe it or not, our whole economy was about $1 trillion. We're getting ready to spend $1 trillion just in one swipe of the pen here. And so GDP dropped it lost $200 billion during the Great Depression from 1929 to 1933. So prices went down. And I can tell you right now that the government's saying we do not want any part of what happened in 1929 to 1933. So that's why they're coming up with a massive spending plan to keep prices from falling too low. Now, the short run aggregate supply curve slopes upward, just like that one did. Let's see. Let's move on here. Sticky wages. How do sticky wages affect the short run? Remember what I was telling you in class, that just because we have a shock like this, people aren't willing to come to work for half as much. Okay. So that's what we mean by sticky wages. So companies will lay people off. They can't just come in and say, okay, I have 100 employees. You were making, $50,000 a year. Now we're only going to pay you $25,000. That's not going to happen. That just can't happen in the real world. Okay. They're going to lay off people before that happens. So that's what we mean by wages being sticky. And, let's see, the shifts in the short run aggregate supply curve. Okay. We've already dealt with, a short run, supply curve that's shifting leftward. So again, you can read some of this stuff, other reasons why it might shift. So on the, if you look here, the left side panel is what our economy is experiencing right now. Okay. Normally when I'm teaching this, it's not as dramatic as this, but this is actually what's going on. So these here are true to form, true to real world, real time. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I see somebody's comment. Our generation has been through the most. Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. Some of you graduated, high school and, around the mid 2000s or whatever. And now this. Okay. So now it's, you're getting quite a few shocks here. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I don't want, sometimes, these are the worst of times, but they're also going to be the best of times. And there's hope beyond this. And, again, remember, you still have the benefit of age. You're going to have a lot of experience here, because of this, what you're going through. Again, stay close to those you love, keep the conversation going. And, again, there is hope again. So, depending on how discouraged you might get, do reach out to me if you need to. Because in a sense, I haven't been, at the young age when some of the stuff was going on, but, again, I have a little bit of a perspective, having grown up in the 70s and the inflationary times, and even now. So, and seeing a lot of different changes. But yeah, you're absolutely right, though. I would not put an argument up against that. And so here's shifts in aggregate supply. Once again, I'll let you look at those. I'm not going to read those to you. I want to get to another graph here. We'll shift to the right. Okay, so the short run aggregate supply curve will shift to the right when productivity rises. So again, the first three there, those are negatives to the, and I just bring those up. That's not what's going on in the economy right now. But those are what causes rightward shifts as well. Okay, so I hope that answered some of your questions there. I see. I'm trying to get used to reading the comments on the side there. Thank you. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for bearing with me here. Now, the long run aggregate supply curve shows the relationship between the aggregate price level and the quantity of aggregate output supplied that would exist if all prices, including nominal wages, were fully flexible. And like I said, they're not flexible in the short term, but over the long term, wages are flexible. And I know sometimes we complain, well, this job should pay this much, or whatever. But in a free market society, generally the jobs we take on or the careers, that's what they pay. I mean, that's just, if we want to raise our income up, we've got to get the skills, we've got to get the productivity. That's the only thing that really forces our wages up. Potential output is the level of real GDP the economy would produce at all if all prices, including nominal wages, were flexible. Okay, so we talked about that. And we know they're not flexible in the short term, but let's see. So here, the level of real GDP is almost always either above or below potential. So we're right on here. Take note there, potential output and then actual aggregate output. So we try to get to equilibrium, and you can see there in 2009, we were below. I mean, below what we could actually do in our economy. So that's what that's kind of signifying there. Let's see here. All right. So again, from the short run to the long run. So here, this is important because now we're dealing with, what's going on right now in the economy and what it's going to be in the long run. So the left side there is showing, again, down at the bottom is real GDP, basically what the nation is putting out in the economy. And it's got, we're basically beyond our potential there. See, YP, that's what we're able to produce. But what we're actually doing in the short run, in this particular example, not in the real economy right now, they have this as 2018. We're actually beyond what we should be producing. Okay, so now this here is where you get in. This here is showing you a demand shock, if you not necessarily a shock, but there's too few dollars chasing after too many dollars chasing after too few goods. When you see a short run supply curve going past what we're really supposed to be producing. Now on the right panel, I want to bring this to your attention again. The long run aggregate supply curve, which is the curve that's straight up and down. That means throughout time, throughout the rest of your life, we're going to be striving to cross that in the intersection of supply and demand. All right. So right now, if you look at A1, we are below what our country is potential producing. And that's really worldwide right now. Okay. Right as we speak here in 2020, March, whatever today is, the 19th, we are basically that panel on the right. We have a fall in nominal wages, shifts, short run aggregate supply, rightward. That's in the future, but right now we're at A1. Okay. Eventually we will slide, that short run aggregate supply to the right. But right now we are operating at the Y1 there on that panel. Let's see where. Okay, and so again, the Great Recession. We talked about this in class last time. Where wages were stuck there. So here's the ADS model, kind of putting it together. Here's equilibrium. So you see Y down here, YE, equilibrium at real GDP. And this is the short run in an economy that's in equilibrium. Like I said, we're not there right now, but that is the goal. And if you were to draw a line straight up and down there, that would be the long run aggregate supply. And like I said, we're dealing with shocks right now in the economy. All right, so here's kind of putting them together with this is demand shocks here. The one on the left here, if again we've got a demand shock, but in a sense we're in the right side here, not in the left. We're demanding a lot of goods right now, so it's pushing aggregate demand up. It's a shift, like we said earlier. It's a shift along the short run aggregate supply curve. Prices are increasing in certain things, and they will until we can get money pumped back into the economy and get the supply side of things built back up. Again, hoping for a very, very short recovery. That most recessions last about 11 months. Hopefully that this one's not going to last that long, but it very well could. Okay, so you can look at this here. It just goes through some of the history of what we've had in the past, and so forth. So let me explain chapter 12 homework. Are there any comments, questions? Or everybody turn me off by now? as we learn our way through.